the same coalition of social forces, the same coalition of social classes and strata that came together to create the constitutional revolution in 1905, came together in 1951 to support Dr. Mossadegh. It was very much the same social coalition. The middle class, the urban poor, parts of the working class, the students, the women's movement, whatever there was of social democracy, and the progressive part of the clergy. That was the coalition that made the constitutional revolution. That was the coalition that was behind Dr. Mossadegh. That was the coalition that made the 1979 revolution. But something very strange happened in 1979. Instead of someone who was the continuation of Naimi winning the leadership of this coalition, someone who was a direct descendant of Nouri won the leadership, Ayatollah Khomeini. And very clearly, he made it understood that 1979 is payback for the constitutional revolution. As Rafsanjani has said more than once, as Khomeini has said at least once, he said in 1905 the clergy were fooled by the secular intellectuals. This time we use the secular intellectuals and we fooled them. The incredible phenomenon is that that same social class is now behind the Green Movement. In other words, if we want to deconstruct who is this Green Movement, who are the people who are fighting for democracy today, I would submit that the social morphology of this class, of this coalition, is essentially the same morphology that I mentioned for the 1979, for the 1953, for the 1905. Every time these people have seen their dream of democracy fail. And there's been historic reasons why it has failed. In 1905, the idea for democracy was there, but there was neither the social institutions nor a true understanding of what democracy is. There was no civil society in 1905. Even the most important intellectuals advocating democracy in 1905 had a limited understanding of what democracy meant. They could not conceive, for example, that members of the Baha'i sect at the time or the Babi sect at the time should have the right to vote. They could not conceive that there should be equality between men and women. There are some remarkable indications of how limited their understanding was. But more important than their understanding, is that there was no social network. Democracy is not just an idea. Democracy is an idea supported by solid institutions that can support it. It requires a civil society, autonomous groups that can act as a buffer between state and power, that can protect the individual, that can train the individual into the laws of democracy. That did not exist. And the advocates of democracy were very early in their evolution. There was a small middle class. There was a small merchant class. There was the rudiments of a working class. There were very, very beginnings of a women's movement in 1909. As we have progressed, things have changed. Again, the paradox of the Iranian modern history is that from 1925 to 1979, you had the Pahlavis, the father and the son, who were very much dedicated to many of the ideas of the Iranian constitutional revolution. Ideas like enfranchisement for women, ideas like education, ideas like building a secular system, a secular education system, and ideas like secularizing the judiciary. These are things that were accomplished during this period. Because of the oil, the middle class was strengthened in ways that are unimaginable. If you look at some of the statistics of Iranian society in 1919 to the Iranian society in 1975, 1979 even, it is a remarkable shift. It is as if a modern nation has been created. Iran in 1919 was almost a failed state. Iran in 1919 lacked central authority. Iran in 1919 had lost from 1900 to 1918 at least a quarter of its population. Some estimate it to be 40%. We don't have it. The reason we have such divergence of the statistics is because we don't have an exact number on how many people lived in Iran. There was no census. The numbers vary from 10 million to 15 million. But at least a quarter of the population was lost to Spanish flu, hunger, cholera. In 1919, it was really, Iran was a failed state. There was not a single women's hospital in the country. The only women's school were those created by missionaries. In 1979, you had many of the rudimentary necessities of a democratic society. You had a larger middle class. You had a larger educated class. You had enfranchised women. You had women who had begun to vote. Now, clearly, the voting process was not very interesting during the Shah. Everyone was pre-elected by the Shah. You know how the election was going. But women had entered by 1975 into the labor force. They were being educated. They had been educated. They were making their themselves felt. All you have to do is remember the poetry of Furugh Farrokhzad. The poetry of Furugh Farrokhzad is not a creation of the Pahlavis, but it is unimaginable with the conditions that were created during that period. Furugh Farrokhzad is probably the most important feminist poet in the history of Iran. The first time a woman asserts the beauty of her body, the first time a woman talks about enjoying sex, the first time a woman says, I want my fair share. All of these things were created. The basic economic, social, necessary ingredients. But neither father nor son believed that they need to share power with the middle class. Neither father or son believed that you can have democracy. They believed that, in fact, despotism or a modernizing authoritarianism is the necessary price you must pay if you want to develop. Both father and son, particularly the son, very repeatedly said that, look, Iran is not the US, Iran is not the West, Iran can't have a democracy like the West. And Shah says, again, repeatedly, that in Iran, only if the Shah is in charge and is in absolute charge can you have economic, political, social change. He was wrong in believing that people are going to forfeit their political rights if you give them economic benefits. The Shah made a calculated risk. We know all of this because much of it is now laid out in documents from the American archive, the British archive. Repeatedly, the Americans were telling the Shah, as early as 1958, we have a CIA analysis in 1958 that says, unless the Shah shares power with the middle class, and this technocratic class is going to lose power. As late as 1974, CIA's chief, Mr. Helms, who had just finished a term as an ambassador to Iran, in his last message from Iran, his end of tour report, says the greatest challenge facing the Shah. This is Shah at the height of his power, 1974. Nobody thinks it's movable. Helms says the greatest challenge facing the Shah is that he has modernized the society and he has to learn to share power. If it doesn't, these people will find someone to unite with and will overthrow him. And that's exactly what happened. In other words, people did not live by economic rights alone. They wanted, once they had the economic benefits of a modern society, they wanted politics as well. If you look at the Shah's period, there's another very clear clue as to why the revolution happened and why we still don't have democracy in Iran. I said the father and son shared a lot of ideas about how to bring modernity to Iran, how to bring Iran into the 20th century. But there was one very important difference between the father and son. Reza Shah believed that the clergy were essentially an obstacle to development in Iran. His son, Mohammad Reza Shah, from literally the first days he came to power, he changed that policy. He came to the conclusion that very soon that his main enemies were first and foremost the communists and to a lesser extent secular Democrats, particularly after 1953 supporters of Mossadegh. So he thought his enemies were the left and Mossadeghis, and he thought that his ally in this fight are the clergy. The clergy are anti-leftist, the clergy are anti-socialist, the clergy are worried about the godless socialism, and they will unite with him, he believed, against this main foe. While Reza Shah reduced to half the number of mosques in Iran from the time he took over to the time he left, there has never been an increase in the number of mosques since we have numbers comparable to the last decade of the Shah's power. The number of mosques multiplied. And by 1975, a minimum 70,000 mosques are in existence in Iran. But the mosques are the tip of the iceberg. We are now beginning to learn how incredibly sophisticated, nuanced, multifaceted the clerical network was. While Savak was blindsided, was completely obsessed with fighting the leftists, while it was obsessed with fighting the Mossadeghis, the clergy were developing their network, they're developing their schools, they're developing the collection of financial support network. It is a remarkable failure. A failure of analysis by the Shah and a failure of analysis by the CIA. The same CIA that in 1958 said Iran is on the verge of a revolution. In 1978, 6 months before the revolution, said Iran is not even in a pre-revolutionary state. The reason was that the US caved under Shah's pressure from 1965 and basically stopped having contacts with the members of the opposition inside Iran. They got their intelligence essentially from the same place the Shah got it, from Salah. And they were caught completely off guard by what was happening. Not just Sabah, not just the CIA, but Iranian intellectuals were completely blindsided by this. The Iranian intellectuals had no sense of how powerful the clerical establishment is. They believe that they are the most important force in society. They believe Iran has entered the modern age. They believe it is impossible to go back to some of the ideas that they thought Ayatollah Khomeini was advocating. So they were completely taken with this democratic facade in 1978. When he came to Iran, of course, as I said, Ayatollah Khomeini changed his mind. And you got this two incongruences. The incongruence in the constitution between a presidency that is elected by the people but really doesn't have much power. And the other incongruency is a society that had wanted democracy and was now saddled with Vilayat al-Faqih. These two incongruencies have been at the core, I think, of Iranian politics in the last 30 years. They are what is driving the democratic quest, and it is what is the main obstacle to the democratic quest, in the sense that that institution, the institution of Vilayat al-Faqih, with its enormous power, with its enormous financial gains as a result of the increase in the price of oil, has been able to create a constituency for itself. 15–20% of the population that is now very much invested in this undemocratic structure. Let me end by saying that